The first thing we need to do is transform this footage from log to Rec. 709. A lot of people will right click and go to LUT and use a transform LUT. I prefer to use CSTs or color space transforms. They are found over here in the effects panel under Resolve FX Color. I'm actually going to do 2 of them. So I'm going to create a new node, and that was Option S, by the way, to create a new node in front of the selected node. If you want to make one behind, you can do Shift S. I'm going to take the first one and I'm going to put a color space transform on it. I'm going to take the second one and do the exact same thing. So on this first one, I'm going to go to Input Color Space, and this one's going to be Blackmagic Design Wide Gamut 4 and 5, and it's going to be Blackmagic Film Generation 5. Those are going to be my inputs. Outputs are going to be DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate. The reason why I'm not transforming to Rec. 709 is because this node will transform from log to a wide color space as our intermediate, which will be DaVinci Intermediate. This one will take DaVinci Intermediate and turn it into Rec. 709, and that way all of our nodes in between here will operate in a nice, standardized, large color space. I'm also going to turn off tone mapping, and then we'll go to the second one. And since it was transformed to DaVinci Wide Gamut and DaVinci Intermediate, we'll take those and put them as our inputs. And then output, we want to do, in this case, Rec. 709, and we want to do Gamma 2.4. So here we are. When we look at this in our viewer over here, this is a Rec. 709 image. This is straight out of camera. That's before. This is our log image, and that's Rec. 709. It already looks pretty good, but we can make it look a lot better. We also need to label these. I'm always trying to get better at this. This is our CST in, and this one will be our CST out. Now that we have these, I'm going to make 7 new nodes. And then I'm going to go to this one, and I'm going to do 2 more after. And then we'll just do 4 up top, and then we'll put everything else below. Kind of arrange everything in a little bit of a line. And then actually on this last one, I'm going to add a parallel node right there. Some node trees are absolutely beautiful. Maybe someday I'll come back through here and figure out some way to make it look geometrically appealing. But for now, this is what we're stuck with. And now let's go through and label everything. This first one is going to be exposure. And then we'll make number 3 balance. 4 will be saturation. 5 we're going to call primaries. And then 6, I'm going to do hue versus hue. 6, I'm going to call adjust. 9 will be texture. 10 is going to be film look. We already have 11. 12 will be contrast. 13 will be grain. Before I show you guys how to set up these nodes, I want to thank Skillshare for the support of the channel. When I set out to restructure my node tree, I wanted to brush up on some basics and maybe learn some new things that I was unaware of. So the class that I took this month is Fred Trevino's Color Grading Introduction with a Pro Colorist. It was nice to cover the basics again, learn a couple of new things along the way. Fred is a full-time colorist, so he's actually working in the field, and it was nice to have a human teaching the class, which is something Skillshare is supporting fully. There's nothing more fundamental and valuable than humans teaching other humans about the things they're passionate about, and Skillshare is filled with examples of this. I've scrolled through the classes on Skillshare many times and had trouble picking what I wanted to learn next because there are so many great options. I think it's a really great thing to seek out new hobbies or sharpen existing ones. If you want to start learning today, the first 500 people that use my link or scan the QR code can get an entire month of free Skillshare. Thank you to Skillshare for the support of the channel. Let's get into setting up these nodes. Now, maybe some are raising their eyebrows at a couple things in here, like doing contrast last. That's probably a big no-no, but I don't necessarily want to blindly recommend this exact node tree to anybody, but maybe there are some ideas in here that might become useful to someone. This is just the way I find myself grading, and it definitely works for me. It has been working for me pretty well. I think this is a pretty efficient system, and I get good results out of it. Take what you want and leave the rest. Let's set these up. So exposure exposure doesn't need anything specific. What I do in this node is go to HDR, and then I go down here to the global wheel, and there's this exposure dial, and this is how I'm going to adjust my exposure. The reason why I do this one specifically is because we're transforming to DaVinci Wide Gamut, and if we go into my project settings, my timeline color space is DaVinci Wide Gamut and intermediate. And by the way, my output is 709A. So then if we go to exposure, we go to HDR, and then we open the side menu right here, and we go to color space and gamma. It says use timeline, and that means that it's already using the correct gamma and color space, everything set up the way it should. And that means that the exposure wheel here works really well. It raises and lowers the exposure in a really natural way. So it's the first thing I adjust. If an image is clearly under or overexposed, I'll give it a little bit of a boost so I can see what I'm doing. This one looks pretty well exposed. I don't think we need to do too much here. Our next node is balance. This is where we are going to white balance the image. The easiest way to do this would be to just come down here and look at this little temp slider and start rocking things around, maybe some tint. I usually don't have a lot of luck with this method because it feels a little bit like playing Battleship. You're kind of just moving things and then moving another thing, and then that looks bad. So then you have to go over here and move this and then move this, and it's a little bit of a guessing game and not quite as powerful as the method that I prefer to use, which is to right click the node to go to gamma, change it to linear. And now when we go to our regular primary wheel right here, and we go to our gain, the gain will now globally affect the image with a really nice natural tint. I'm going to turn my vector scope on so we can see, and then actually I'm going to zoom in a little bit. When we grab this and move it in any direction, the whole image will shift. Gives you a little bit more control, makes it a little bit easier to nail stuff. If it's too sensitive, what you can do is go in here to the key settings and change the gain maybe to like 50%, 0.5. And now this control is 50% as powerful. So again, I don't know if this needs to be white balanced. Maybe I'll kick back a little bit of that warmness. And we'll leave that there. I love using this method, just opening up the vector scope and then only worrying about one little wheel here. I like it better than using offset. I think the results are a little bit better. Okay, let's move on to saturation. This one will seem complicated when we're setting it up, but it's not too bad. I like to right click to go to color space and to choose HSV. And then I'm gonna turn off channel 1. And I'm gonna turn off channel 3. So now saturation is the only channel that's active. And now when we go to our primaries, instead of just having a global slider, now we have control of the gain, gamma, and lift. And what that's going to do is the lift will affect the undersaturated parts of the image first. So you can see really neutral stuff like this shirt here, like the monitor. That stuff will get its saturation first. Gain is the most saturated parts of the image, and gamma is in between. So now we have a little bit more control there if we want to add a little bit more richness to the image and kick back some of the more saturated areas that are already saturated. We have that control. Now, one of the downsides of using a big color space is when you want to start using primaries, they are incredibly sensitive. I mean, I'm barely moving this and it's introducing a ton of color into the gamma areas. So what I do with my primaries is I go into here and then we do this key trick again. I'm setting this to 25%. And now it's way less sensitive. We can barely add some color and it's a little bit easier, especially if you don't have a panel, a DaVinci Resolve panel, and you're using a mouse like I am. This is an easy way to get better results. I'm just gonna add a little bit of coolness to the shadows and a little bit of warmth to the gamma. This can and probably will change later when we get further down into the process. Hue versus hue is here also. I don't always use this node, but in case I want to come in here and maybe I think that the trees are a little too saturated, I can ease off some of that saturation. Maybe I think that, you know, our reds need to be purple. You know, anything like that. Any hue stuff I'm going to do in this node right here. Adjust is also a node I don't use all the time. This is just a trim node. Basically, if there's any last minute thing that I want to do after all of the other adjustments, if I think at the very end, I don't want to come back here and adjust the exposure back here or balance or saturation or whatever it is, I can come in here and just tweak something. I'm going to leave it the way it is right now. Texture is going to be blurring or sharpening. And typically what I do is I go to primaries. I'm going to go to midtone detail. And it depends on the shot, but normally I'll do -20, -30, sometimes -40. You have to be careful because the more you go down, the more it's going to introduce kind of like a bizarre glow, and it can look a little plasticky and fake. So with this shot specifically, let's call it -30. We can toggle that on and off. And then depending on the shot and depending on the delivery, a lot of times I'll go into the blur and add a little bit of blurring here so that it's 0.52 instead of 0.5. Just kind of smooths the image out a little bit, takes a little bit of the edge off the digital sensor. I've also been experimenting a lot with diffusion filters lately because I think that gives better results to actually shoot the diffusion instead of in post worrying about it. I think the results are always better, and there are other advantages to diffusion filters. But still, even while using a black satin or a black pro mist, it's still a good idea to have a node ready in case we need to do some blurring. Now here's the film look. I've gone back and forth many times. This is why there are sauce 2, 3, 4s. I've been working on this internally for a while, and this is the 4th iteration of the sauce. And the main thing that's changed is the way that I'm doing my film look. Historically, I've gone in here to LUT and I've used the installed DaVinci Resolve film looks, probably a Kodak 2383. I have found a method that I think is a little bit better, or at least gives a little bit more control, and that's to go to your library of effects and add a film look creator, which can get heavy-handed really fast. We're going to go up here to presets and say clean slate, so it's doing nothing if I turn it off and on. There is all kinds of crazy things down here. We can add flicker and gate weave and all that stuff. But what I want to do is turn up the film look blend, and I want to change it to Rochester. And what this is going to do is just introduce a little bit of a Kodak 2383 film emulation. But we can go in here and we can adjust the strength of it. If we want to trim and bring the highlights down, if we want to do some richness work in here, exposure, there's a lot of extra controls. But normally I leave this exactly the way it is right now. We can see when we toggle this on and off, it's doing a lot to the image already, and we're going to play with this in a second. Node number 11 is the CST out. We've already set this up the way it should be set up. Right now I'm doing contrast as the last thing in my node tree because beforehand I was doing contrast in here after the CST in and before the CST out. So this is in a big color space. And then if I make sure my waveform is on, and then we go to curves, which is my preferred method to introduce and take away contrast. It doesn't always do exactly what you think it's doing, and that's because it's going into another CST. Everything's being transformed. So when you want to pick your black point and you want to raise it a little bit, it's going to do a lot more than just that. So when you have contrast at the very end, it's going to do exactly what the control's telling it it's doing. Now when we raise the black point, it's only raising the black point. Typically, what I'm doing is actually not an S-curve. It's just a simple ramp. So I'll leave my black point down here. And also, this is key. To go into this little menu and turn on editable splines. So then when you press top or the bottom, it gives you a little handle. And then you can do a really nice Bezier curve automatically. I usually grab the bottom one. I bring it out. And then an S-curve would be this way. I actually usually like to do a little bit of a ramp here. And then what I do is go back to exposure and feed it more exposure into that curve. And then once I've gone back there, I can go back to the contrast, and if it needs to be adjusted more, then we can do that. I've found this to give really, really smooth results. If we toggle both of those, it's just a little bit more richness to the image. We don't have to introduce a crazy S-curve or anything. So I use the exposure to feed the contrast curve that I'm picking instead of trying to do exposure and contrast with the same curve adjustment. Last but not least is film grain. I'm going to go to the effects. I'm going to find film grain. I'm going to put it on here. Let's do 35mm 400T. Let's turn the grain strength all the way up, and then I'm going to turn opacity down to, I don't know, 0.4. Let's do grain only for 1 second. I want to turn saturation all the way up. I want to turn softness down quite a bit. And then, let's see here. Grain size should be all the way down. I'm going to take texture all the way down. And then we can leave grain aspect ratio the way it is. Let's go back in. And from here, we can turn down the opacity. So maybe 0.3 is good. What I like to do is go into the advanced controls and turn down midtones. So that way in complicated midtones like skin tones, there won't be as much film grain, but in patterns back here, we'll be able to see it a lot more. For now, I'm actually going to turn this off so that we can run the machine a little bit smoother, since film grain really kills performance. This is exactly how I set up my node tree. If you ever want to save this yourself, all you got to do is open up gallery, and then you can go to power grade, right click, grab still. And now if this is blank, you can just grab this still and it'll just copy and paste that grade on here. So if I just slapped this on this image, this is probably what I would do. The reason why I really like this film look creator is because it takes saturation and transforms the way it works digitally into a little bit more of how saturation reacts through film, through celluloid. And what I mean by that is if we turn this off, we go to saturation, and remember, gain is our more saturated part. So if we really bump the saturation here, and then we turn on film look, it increases the density and it makes the image darker instead of lighter. So when we take away saturation, the image gets a little bit brighter. But when we increase it, it just adds this beautiful richness, and it doesn't get heavy-handed very fast. You can actually add a ton of saturation and it still looks pretty well balanced. If you turn off the film look creator, it's gonna look, insane. But it makes it darker. It adds a little bit of richness to it. I'm going to adjust our contrast just a little bit. And then actually that might be a little bit too much saturation. I'm going to pull this back. We'll go to primaries. I think we need to cool this off a bit. So make sure that our shadows have a little bit of coolness. And I don't know, I think that looks pretty nice actually. I'm going to grab everything that we did. Let's turn on grain. I'm going to grab everything that we did besides the CSTs. So that's where we started. And that's where we ended up. Just a smoother image. I think it looks a lot better. It looks a lot more, dare I say, cinematic perhaps. And now we can take what we've learned here and move on to some other images. So I'm gonna go to, let's do this one. Now we can just take the Sauce 4, slap it on. Doesn't look great, but that's okay. This was recorded in C-Log 2, and at least in my preset, it's always set to Blackmagic Film, which is what I'm normally using. But all we need to do is go to this first CST and change this to Canon Cinema Gamut and change it to C-Log 2. And now everything's set up so that it will work exactly the way it worked for the Blackmagic footage. Nothing else needs to be changed. It's still going to DaVinci Wide Gamut, still transforming out of DaVinci Wide Gamut. And all of these nodes in between will work perfectly because it's in between these two CSTs. So because we have this film look set up, what we can do is feed a ton of saturation into this. I mean, that's a crazy, crazy amount. If we turned off the film look creator, it's gonna look bizarre, but it just eases all of that really crazy saturation down and turns it into this rich density. I'm gonna go into texture, and this is an image. Since it's a close-up, you can really bring the texture down with the midtone detail, and it'll look pretty nice. I think we also need to go to the blur and add a little bit there. There's a couple things we can do with contrast, and this is a good example to show another reason why I like putting contrast at the end, and that's all the soft clip controls. Down here, if we take, for example, low soft, and if you keep your eye on the waveform, you can see the black level slowly rising, but it's more rolling off. It's just making the black point a little bit softer. You can more or less turn this all the way up and then pick your black point with low and do the exact same thing with high. And nothing's clipping on here really. And then if you go back to exposure and you keep your eye on the waveform, when I go up and down, it's rolling off. You've picked your black point and your white point, and then you can play around that and it will automatically create a highlight roll off for you and make the shadows look a lot smoother. I really, really like having this at the end. If it wasn't at the end, then it wouldn't react that way. It's cool. You can almost pick your black and white points, and then the image will respect that with all the adjustments that you do beforehand. So I will actually probably keep the way that I did the shadows if I turn this on and off. Just smooths it out a little bit. You have to be careful because if you put the low soft on too high and then you pick a black point that's too high, it can make the image look washed out and kind of lame. So we do need to be careful with that. I will, however, go over here to curves and create our ramp. And as usual, that's a little bit too dark. So we'll go to exposure and we'll feed it a little bit more exposure, but now it is using our ramp that we've created. So here's before and after both of those. Just looks a lot smoother to me. Maybe I think that this is overall a very warm image. I can go to my primaries and then I can open up my vector scope and I can add a little bit of coolness to the shadows, maybe just a little bit of green. It's one of the things that I really like about this Rochester emulation is it's so good at introducing color contrast with black parts of the image. Look at that saturation. Look at my face before and after that film look, the way that it's making it look a little bit more natural. And I don't know, I think that's probably pretty close to what I would do for this image, just for a basic, clean looking look. I'm gonna turn off everything that we did. That's straight out of camera, and that's after. That looks way, way, way better. This is Blackmagic Raw again. I'm gonna take the Sauce 4, I'm gonna put it on there, and this looks pretty great right out of camera. We could do something different than we did last time, and instead of feeding a bunch of saturation, which would look like, you know, that, you can take away saturation and it will treat it just as naturally. That's also a look that lots of people really like. I think it looks really natural and great. We could go to our film look, and at any time you can change it to one of the different emulations. I love what Rochester does to everything but greens. I think that Cinematic does a little bit of a better job keeping them muted, but this is kind of a fun look. We can go over here to exposure, turn up the exposure, and then go to contrast and sort of pick our black point. I'm gonna open up my waveform. Maybe we bring everything down a little bit. Create our ramp. Add a little bit of low soft. And then maybe we feed it a little bit more. I think that's a really great looking image. Again, this is what it looks like with all the adjustments versus straight out of camera. We didn't do a whole lot there, but this film emulation does such a good job of making the image look a little deeper to me. This image looks like it has, the contrast and the colors make this look more three-dimensional almost. And this looks very flat. One more image. This is out of the Ursus Cine 12K LF. Incredible sensor, but it is Blackmagic Raw, so we'll just throw that on there. Looks really great right away. That's without the film emulation. That's with it. I want to do a little bit more of a high key look here, since we actually are clipping. The danger of an image that is clipped in the highlights and doing this ramp technique is if you push it too far, it's doing a really good job with the highlight roll off here, but it can start to expose the areas where exactly where it's clipping. Probably right here, maybe a little bit over here. So we are going to do the exact same thing, but we'll do a little bit of an S-curve. So I'm going to bring this down. I'm going to grab this one, and we'll do a little bit of a ramp. Now I can do high soft. I can bring this way down. A little bit of low soft. Now we can feed it some exposure. And if you watch the waveforms, it's going to respect the spot that I picked for the white point. That might be a little bit too much contrast, so I'm going to ease off on the S-curve. There we go, and let's add a little bit of saturation. Watch how it makes everything a little bit more rich and dark instead of bright and digital looking. That's what it looks like without the film emulation. There's before, and let's turn both of these on. It's just so much richness to the image. This might be a little bit too warm, so we could go in here and do it in the raw settings since this was recorded in raw, but I'm gonna go to the balance and I'm gonna open up vector scope. Then we can do this with gain. There we go. Yeah, I like that a little bit more. Maybe go into primaries, keep it nice and warm, but add a touch more coolness to the shadows. I don't think texture necessarily needs anything. So yeah, that's what I would do to this one. Let's look at before and after. Straight out of camera. And there's all of our adjustments. A nice high key look. This is essentially how I grade every single image. I always start with the sauce, but things always change from there. Sometimes I go in and I change the film look and change the core look, or I do different, gamma curves with the contrast. Sometimes I'm feeding it more exposure. Sometimes I'm not touching exposure at all, and I'm only doing it in contrast. It's really nice to not have to build my own node tree every single time. I just throw this on, and then it's usually pretty close already. All my tools are set up the way I like it. Please let me know what you guys think, and if you've tried this method out and it works for you or it doesn't work for you, let me know in the comments. I really do appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you soon.